Well, good evening, everybody, and thank you for joining Regina and me for this special Facebook Live event. The conversation continues, a discussion on race and allyship. We appreciate you all taking the time to listen to the wonderful panelists we have tonight, and I am telling you, they are four phenomenal women, all with ties to Ventura County, but with impact much broader than that. With everything in our community has experienced in these last few weeks, the brutal and unjust death of George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter movement have served as a reminder that many structural inequalities still exist in our communities today. We have seen people of all nationalities and backgrounds come together to send leaders a message that the system is not working to protect and serve equally. Upon speaking to local community organizers and leaders, we discussed how we could provide additional information about the movement, its goals, and how we can all be better allies to the Black community here in Ventura County. Because I couldn't have this conversation alone, especially because my experience as a white woman is not representative of the experiences of many people of color in our communities. And that is why I'm grateful that the NAACP, or the Naacp, sorry, Regina, Ventura County chapter have agreed to co-host this conversation. We have some of our community leaders here today to be heard and to share their experiences of being Black in Ventura County. At this time, it's important to come together and support one another, which includes taking the time to truly listen to the stories of our fellow community members. And I'm looking forward to doing that tonight. I'd now like to welcome Regina Hatcher-Crawford, President of the NAACP Ventura County Chapter. Regina?
Thank you, Assemblymember Jackie Irwin, for inviting me and the NAACP to be a part of the special conversation. As you mentioned, there are many opportunities to come together and talk, and that's important. But we also want to make sure that our community is being heard. I have personally dedicated myself in youth leadership and development of political and social advocacy and the pursuit of civil rights and social justice. Because we've been here in a fight for a very long time. My father was influential in this community and in this movement. He was an activist and believed in teaching the children early about being of service. I believe the key to today's success is fortifying and building a core value of unity, solidarity, and responsibility within our people and our communities. I look forward from hearing from our guests tonight and what suggestions they may have to bring us closer. Jackie?
All right, well, and with that, let's get to our guest speakers tonight. With us, we have Phoenix Police Chief Jerry Williams, who is the former Chief of Police for the City of Oxnard. Chief Williams is one of only 7 Black women police chiefs in all of the country's major metropolitan police departments. Thank you for joining us here tonight, and we'll hear more from you in just a few moments, Jerry.
Well, thank you.
And I'd like to introduce Dr. Pinker, who sits on the executive board of the NAACP and is also executive director for the Pinker Youth Institute. And she was a former pro tem mayor for Oxnard City Council and has more than 20 years as executive director for Pinker Youth Institute. She also is the founder of the Black College Tour. And so that's kind of important to mention, where she takes a bunch of youth, a lot of youth from all the way from LA to Riverside to Oxnard to the historical Black colleges so that they can get the Black experience in a college setting. She also has the African American Enrichment, what is it?
Academy.
African American, right, where she takes the kids, and it's neat. She takes them to Channel Islands, and they stay on the campus for a week, and they basically are college students there, so she really works them out there. But I'd like to introduce Dr. Pinker.
Hi.
And lastly, I'd like to introduce one of Ventura County's rising stars, Mikaya Foster, the young woman who organized the successful and peaceful BLM march in Simi Valley just a few weeks ago. Thank you so much for joining us here this evening.
So Dr. Pinker, I'm gonna start the conversation with you. Can you tell us your perspective of what's been, what you witnessed going on in the world today, as first Black councilman for the city of Oxnard. And I believe actually you were the first city councilwoman in Ventura County, if I recall. And your experience as a public official, and why is it important for you and your experience to be heard?
Well, first I want to thank Assemblywoman Irwin and you for putting this together, having this conversation, because I think that nothing is going to happen unless we have conversations. And without the conversations, then everyone is going to be a mystery to each other. It's been said that distance precedes suspicion. And so, meaning that as long as we're apart from each other, we're always going to be suspicious of each other. So the conversations are important right now. And what I see happening right now is not anything different than what we've had going on from 1954. If you look back in the civil rights movement, we were doing the same thing in 1954. We've made baby steps, but seem to have gone backwards. So I see this movement a little different than the others because we have more white individuals involved. We have more young people involved, and it's happening all over the world. It's just not the United States. This pandemic of racism has reached far beyond our shores. So I see it differently this time because we have more people concerned about racism and what it's doing to the economic development of our country. And that's what I see that's different. And as a person who was the first Black woman elected as a councilwoman in the county, it was very strange that that should be happening in 2008, that we would be just getting our first African-American woman for any elective legislative position. But I think that we are making movement, be it too slow for my liking. I would like to see something going, happening a little different than what we've seen in the past before I pass away. I'm probably the oldest person on here, and I would like to see Mikaya and those her age not have to wrestle with the prejudices that I went through when I went to college. And I'll tell you that story a little later about me and my roommate when I went to college. And the signs that were on lawns in Long Beach, California, telling me that they don't rent to the in people on their lawn, like a for rent sign. So things have moved, but not quickly enough. And every time we move forward, we move backwards. So we can't afford to move backwards, and we can't afford to lose the momentum. And that's why I'm happy to see that there is a protest continually. I know that Jerry doesn't probably like that idea, but I think the protest happening continually helps with the movement.
Jerry, as a Black woman and a police chief, your perspective is very unique. How do you walk that line and maintain an equilibrium with everything that's going on?
So to Dr. Pinker's point, thank you, Assemblywoman Irwin, for convening such an esteemed panel of individuals. Although I don't know Mikaya, very encouraging always to see someone in her age group willing to step up and coordinate and organize. So I kind of want to start, Assemblywoman, with Dr. Pinker's last point about the whole protest piece. From my perspective, so was in Oxnard, California for almost 6 years, became the chief here in 2016. The protests are teaching people in positions that I have, people in your position, Assemblywoman, people in Regina's position too right now, that they will not be silenced or quieted. And gone are the days where we say, let's just sit down and have a discussion and nothing happens or nothing comes about from those discussions. They are literally forcing the movement and forcing change at light speed, to be honest with you. So when we talk about changing, we're talking about policies, procedures, practices, what law enforcement should and shouldn't do. And then some of those expectations that move beyond that, because our state legislature and our federal folks have some play in this too when it comes to some of the policies that we've had in the past that are not in keeping with what folks want to see in the future. So you talked a little bit about my perspective. It is very unique. Being an African-American woman, I was the first female police chief in Oxnard, the first female police chief here, coupled with the fact that, you know, the people who are marching and protesting are my children's age. You know, they're those 20-year-olds, and those are the kind of conversations that I've been having for the last, Alan's 27, so last 27 and 26 years. So walking the line isn't easy, but at the same time, I do have to make sure that I'm true to myself and true to my word, because that matters. I do have to make sure that I still keep 4,000 people operating and working here at the police department, while at the same time showing tremendous support and probably, if nothing else, the willingness to change and adjust and improve, and have it be very genuine to people. So I think that perspective helps. But at the same time, I'm not just the Black female police chief, I'm the police chief. So that comes with a lot of balancing also. So I've said this, I actually said this to my team and to my staff today. The times have been challenging, period, end of conversation, exhausting, the days, the nights, the weekends, you name it. But I wouldn't want to be in any other place other than where I am at the moment, because I think as a community and as a country, we're all going to be part of the solution as opposed to part of the problem. So thank you.
Before I ask Mikaya a question, I want to go back to Jerry. One of the things that you inspired me when you were here at the police chief is you spoke at our banquet and you talked about, more importantly, being a mom of 2 sons and being a mother who knew about having that conversation, having that talk at 2 o'clock in the morning. I guess for me, that was inspiring. That was one of those moments. I seen the police chief, but I also seen a woman that was struggling in between, trying to maintain, you know, supporting the officers while also understanding the Black community. I as well have been in your position. Can you speak a little bit about that? Then I'm gonna go to Mikaya.
So, and what Regina was referring to, so my oldest son was at school, I'm just gonna say in Northern California, not to call out any specific agency, but had been stopped numerous times for things that really didn't even make any sense. We always made sure as parents they had proof of insurance, a current registration, driver's license, you name it. So those are some of the basic things that as a parent or a grandparent or someone who's a caregiver, you have to make sure that all kids have. We don't get to pick and choose that. That's part of law. But at the same time, he's riding down the street with a bunch of basketball players. They have their windows down. The music is probably loud, but they're only stopping my son. So at 2 o'clock in the morning, when your then 22-year-old calls you, it's usually not going to be one of those happy calls. And he is literally on the other end of the phone between tears and swearing like a sailor, trying to figure out and understand, why am I being stopped? And he's literally being stopped because he's a Black guy in a decent car at a college up north. So working through those conversations is interestingly challenging, but you know, not overwhelming to some degree. I will say that our kids were raised, or our sons were raised, to be respectful of law enforcement, but at the same time, they're there to exercise their voice. And so I always say this, that I can't fix what I don't know. So if there are issues and challenges with your police departments or law enforcement entities, you got to speak up so that the leaders in those positions can make those changes or can at least begin the process of having conversations. So thank you, Regina, for that.
Thank you. That was important to me. Like I said, you inspire me, and people needed to see that human person, Jerry, mom, first on the wife. Mikaya, how are you doing? So we met on phone when you first were putting the marks together, and you had some challenges, big challenges, where you, as a child, were having some issues being biracial, from my understanding. And also the fact is you decided to make a statement, and you got to see the ugly side of some people in Simi Valley, even though at the end everyone embraced you. So you brought a very interesting perspective in your conversation and why you decided to do what you were going to do. And from my understanding, your family was very influential and you deciding to speak up. So could you tell me what exactly really got you really interested in doing what you were doing in Simi Valley?
Yeah, so growing up, I heard stories and saw newspaper clippings of, my maternal grandma and grandpa who, would go to protests and you'd see them like on the picket lines. And like my grandpa even went to Selma, Alabama and marched with Martin Luther King Jr. So obviously very, very big shoes to fill. And hearing those stories throughout my childhood is super inspiring. But I think a part of me has also it's kind of just the way I'm wired. Like I was never really one to just sit by and, let people say what they wanted to say. I always, had this in me that I needed to speak up and needed to stand up for people. And I think also because of everything that is going on and has been going on for so long, hits pretty close to home for me. In 2015, my cousin was brutally beaten by 4 police officers. So it's definitely a very heartfelt and touchy subject. But I think even with that, like, even if it hadn't been something that did impact me so heavily on a personal level, I think anybody should speak up about injustices going on. Whether it's affecting you or not, it's affecting somebody. So I think that should be the reason why you should speak up.
All right. Well, appreciate all of you sharing your stories. And I want to get to some of the questions we received from our constituents via email. And also, if you have any questions during the live conversation, please feel free to write them in the comments and we will try to respond if we have time. Regina, would you like to start with the first question?
Okay. So the first question I have here is the beginning of the police brutality online and on TV, how that was brought up in the movement with phones and cameras and so accessible nowadays, and how did that change our reality? That was a long question. Some say racism has been existed, but are we now just seeing more of it because of the cameras rolling? Jerry Williams, as someone in law enforcement whose employees also wear body cameras, what are your perspective as law enforcement officers, what we have witnessed via videos in the last few years?
So that's a great question first and foremost. So what we're seeing now, and it's so fast and so furious and so raw and so real, are the constant images of some law enforcement agencies across the country in a light that's inappropriate. That's in a light that none of us who took the oath of office should be willing to accept. The sheer fact that the George Floyd moment was captured on body-worn camera video, I can remember seeing that and I'm yelling at the TV. I'm like, you cannot be the same. You could not have taken the same oath that I took. And I was angry at the officer who put his knee on his neck. But then I was even more enraged by the 3 officers who were around him, and nobody is saying to him, look, stop, get off of him. He's not doing anything. And at the same time, you have the cell phone videos capturing all those images. So that the constant messaging, regardless of whether or not law enforcement wants to own it or recognize it, we've done some things to folks that is just inappropriate. Period, end of conversation. I think it's important to acknowledge that. And then on the flip side, all of us are not the same. So
Right.
while you see these images from other law enforcement professions, it's definitely this movement that we're all the same, that no one is willing to exercise a duty to intervene, that no one's willing to do anything. And I don't think that that's fair either, but I do understand the angst behind people just saying, look, I don't care what y'all say, I'm gonna protest and protest and protest and protest and protest until I see some tangible change. So you talking to me doesn't matter, us sitting down having a conversation doesn't matter. I want action and I want it now. So our reason for going to body-worn cameras was for transparency and for trust. You need to see what's going on and what my people are going through. You need to see how my guys and gals are reacting. And then you also see the interaction and reaction with those individuals that we come in contact with. So body-worn camera footage, cell phone camera footage is really causing law enforcement to have to get information out at a speed that is at times very uncomfortable. So let's be honest. So I recently had an officer involved shooting, and I won't go into very many details, where there was cell phone video taken that only captured a piece of the story. So I think it's important to articulate that a body worn camera is just a tool. So it's not going to get you from beginning to end all the time. There may be just some pieces that you're not going to see, but at the end of the day, if I have 100 videos to review within X number of days, I can't get all the information out. While someone who's taking a cell phone video, you can post that on YouTube today and you can see it. So I'm still trying to figure out the balance of making sure we get the story out and get the facts out and have it be accurate, while at the same time running a criminal investigation that has some checks and balances in place. So yesterday I announced that we're going to invite the FBI to walk in tandem with us in one of our critical incidents or our officer involved shootings, but also we have a policy here that we implemented last October, I believe, where we said that we were going to push out body worn camera or critical incident information within 45 days. Welcome to July, is this July 8th, Jackie? So welcome to July 8th, 2020. 45 days is X number of days too long. So now I'm forcing my team and my staff to work faster and to work harder to try to work to get that information out in 10 to 14 days. And to be quite honest with you, that's not palatable to a lot of community members. So the cell phone video is helpful. It gives information to the public, but it's not the full story, if you will. And we still have a responsibility to investigate crimes. And like it or not, I can't investigate crimes in 45 minutes like you see on TV. That is literally not even possible in any stretch of the imagination. So we're trying to be up for the challenge, and it's really causing us to really have to work harder, faster, but at the same time still be accurate with our information.
May I say something about the cameras and
Sure.
what it does?
Dr.
First of all,
ask you that question too. Have you seen that video? What are your thoughts?
Oh, okay. I just want to say, or to agree with Chief Williams, not all police are bad. I have police officers in my family. My son was a police officer. So they're not all bad. It's just that the ones who are on the videos and on film have really made the statement that we're going to get you no matter what. But one of the things I'd like to say about the fact of the George Floyd incident and the I guess it was a telephone video, is that we could see that basically from beginning almost to end. So there was no in between or trying to find the pieces. The young lady had it from the very beginning to the end. And this was about a $20 counterfeit bill. Not anything major, a $25 bill. And we watched somebody for 8 minutes and 46 seconds sit there and let you know I can do this and I'm very comfortable doing it.
You're right.
And looking right at the camera to let you know I have no qualms about doing this because I know it, nothing, at least that was my reading, that nothing much is going to happen and I got somebody to protect me from whatever you do. Now, what got me about that particular incident and the whole world seeing it is that I heard a woman who was at a supermarket discussing the video, and her remark was, well, he must have been doing something. If he hadn't have resisted, it probably wouldn't have happened. So because you resist, you can be executed. You can die. So it's as simple as, well, if he hadn't have been resisting, it wouldn't have happened. And that cavalier attitude is the one that must be discussed. And there needs to be a conversation with someone who takes it that lightly, that a life is that dispensable because someone didn't follow some directions. Amen. So that to me was telling, even though we're watching the protest, that I'm hearing someone say that at the supermarket.
Wow. Thank you, Dr. Pinker. Mikaya, as a young person, how has this impacted you as far as how you interact with law enforcement, how you view them now after the George Floyd video? And there's been others after that since then, but how do you feel about it?
Yeah, so I think, growing up as a Black person in America, seeing the George Floyd doesn't really impact your view on police officers because you have seen stuff, you've heard stuff like that your entire life. Growing up, my dad has told me stories about experiences he's had with police. My cousin being brutally beaten by 4 officers in 2015. So when that video came out, it wasn't like I had a change in perspective because for me, I never felt that sense of safety when I was, around a police officer. If I was driving on the freeway and I passed one, my mindset was never, okay, I feel safe. It was, am I sitting up straight? Should I turn my music down? Am I doing anything to make me seem suspicious? Or, are my tail lights working? It was never, okay, I feel safer now that they're here. And I think that's an experience that a lot of young Black or, any age Black Americans have to feel and they go through growing up. For us, it's not necessarily when we have the talk with our parents, it's not, about the birds and the bees. It's about, how do you go about getting pulled over to make sure that you come home?
Yes.
So I think, with the George Floyd video coming out, I wouldn't say it had, so much of a change in mindset for me just because, I've kind of known that the system that we have in place makes it so that it's almost okay for that to happen because it's happened so many times before and it's still happening. I mean, Breonna Taylor wasn't resisting. She was asleep and her murderers still haven't even been arrested or, been sentenced. So I think talking kind of on what Dr. Pinker was saying and Chief Williams about how not all cops are bad, I agree. I don't think all cops are bad. But I think the problem is that the system we have in place makes it okay for some to be bad. And that's the problem.
Exactly.
Thank you all for your honest comments. As a result of what we've seen on social media and TV, we've had a tremendous response from the community. Mikaya, you responded by organizing the BLM march in Simi Valley. Can you tell us more about why you wanted to do this and how difficult was it to do?
Yeah, so I think, just kind of growing up, I was always too young to always go to the protests. And like I said before, I was never the kind of person to just want to sit by and not be able to do anything. So finally, when I had come of age, when it was okay for me to start going to those types of things, they were either, in LA or Ventura, which are both, about 40 minutes to an hour away. And I had never seen anything like that in my own community. We would, driving home, sometimes I'd see, little Trump rallies on the corner, but there was never anything like a Black Lives Matter protest. So I thought, why not? There's Black people in Simi too, and there's allies here too, people of color too. So we should be able to create that same kind of safe space where we're able to uplift our voices and show the community that our lives matter here too. It's just as much our community as it is theirs. So I think that really inspired me to just say, you know what, why not? Because I think everyone deserves a chance to go into those types of spaces and because when you go into a protest like that, when I went to my first Black Lives Matter protest, it's very empowering and it really makes you feel motivated and want to do something. And I think it's an experience that everyone should be able to go to and shouldn't have to drive 40 minutes away. So yeah.
And Irene, how is the NAACP responding to this outcry?
Well, the NAACP has a number of principles that they're working with now. We're tired of dying. And one of the things that they have in place and that they're working on is a ban on the use of the knee holds and chokeholds as an acceptable practice for police officers. So we are working on trying to get that banned. The use of force continuum for a police department in the country must ensure that there are at least 6 levels of steps with clear rules of escalation. Just as Chief Williams said, there should be officers there who know that certain things are not correct and say something. And when they say something, they'll get the support of the community. So it's up to them to do what they need to do to get the support from the community, because they're always asking for assistance from the community. Then they need to do their job and let us see them doing it, and we will give them the assistance they need. each state's Open Records Act, we're asking for us to know who those officers are, what their misconduct information is, and their disciplinary history, so as not to shield them from the public. A lot of times when an officer does something wrong, they don't want to tell you who they are, or tell you how many disciplinary actions they've had. And that's important to know when they are doing things in the community to the residents in the community. Also, when we know that, they don't easily move from one police department to another and get hired. So you get fired one place and get hired another because they don't let that follow you. I would like to have had jobs like that where I could have misconduct and do egregious things and then go somewhere else and get a higher position, which some of them do. And then implementation of the citizens review boards in municipalities to hold police departments accountable and build police and public confidence. Because the review boards are only there so that people can err and you are transparent about what kinds of things happen. And we don't need a rubber stamp review board, which some of them have turned out to be, but a true review board so we can improve the things that are going on in the community. And recertification credentials should be denied to police officers who are not doing their job. So those are some of the things that the NAACP is pushing and looking at in terms of moving forward during this George Floyd pandemic.
Just to follow up on that, Irene, are you working with legislators right now at the federal level or at the state level? How are you trying to get these reforms implemented?
Well, we're trying to get these reforms implemented through the national NAACP, which will then forward them to the national legislators and House of Representatives. We are working individually in our own chapters with doing things locally. But the main thing is to make things happen nationally. We need a federal response to some of the things that are taking place.
And Jerry, how about from a PD perspective?
So in a perfect world, we could have absolutes that say you can't do something all the time. Law enforcement is not perfect. So when Dr. Pinker talks about some of the things that the NAACP is pushing from a national level, I almost want to break it down differently. So there are 18,000 police departments across the country. There are only 70 or so of us that are quote unquote major cities with over 500,000 people. The vast majority of law enforcement agencies are these smaller places where there may be 20 police officers and the police chief is out shagging calls and doing some things. So in that regard, a national registry, and I'll kind of go down the list, but I'll try to be a little bit fast. I totally agree with the banning chokeholds. We did that literally a few days after several nights of protests because it wasn't being utilized. And quite frankly, when something is such a hot button topic that you have the world mobilizing, you are crazy as a police chief not to say, look, we're going to pause on that and not use that anymore. The use of force continuum for me is challenging because our officers don't always have the ability to go from 1 to 6 based on the reaction that or the interaction that they're having with a community member. That sometimes dictates a jumping of those different use of force continuums. But can we do better about de-escalation and talking and training? Absolutely, yeah. We do that. The officer registry, many of us across the country and in the nation are definitely talking through having a national registry. That is definitely going to take people at the state, Assemblywoman. It's going to take people in the nation to come up with what that looks like. But so you have this registry, who's funding it, who's running it, who's checking and balancing it. So it's more than just saying we have this national registry. I mean, the rhetoric sounds amazing, but you really need to have someone on the boots and on the ground really running it. And to your point, Dr. Pinkert, it is happening. So an officer could do something totally bad in one state and then bounce to maybe a police department that has 30 or 40 people in another state, and you would never know what happened with that officer until it's too late. So we are absolutely committed to that. Phoenix just fully funded our first Citizens Review Board. Our community here in Phoenix has literally been asking for citizen review for the last, good Lord, 20 years or so. And so it's taken this time in history for us to have it. There was a lot of conversation at the table. I am being constantly questioned and asked, how do I feel about a citizen review board? I'm not afraid of the truth. I'm not afraid of inviting someone else to come in and look at me, because literally all you can do is tell me what can I do to be a better police chief, a better police department. And I'm constantly messaging that to my employees at all levels in our organization. And I don't remember what else I was going to say, but those are the primary factors. There are also some referendums floating around, like the 8 Can't Wait. I think that came out of the George Floyd movement. That has some absolutes, like you should always give a warning before firing your weapon. In theory, that absolutely and totally makes sense. In practice, I can give you 4 examples today when my people, and I had an example today, my guys did not today have the opportunity to de-escalate and give a warning because they were being fired upon, or as we're coming into a scene, we're being fired upon. So I just want us to be cognizant of the fact that you almost can't have absolutes, you can't have exceptions. I think one of those other exceptions in the 8 Can't Wait was we were never allowed to shoot at moving vehicles. When if you think back to year before last in New York City, you had the terrorists driving through the folks who were trick-or-treating, walking down the street. If you tell me that I can't shoot at a moving vehicle, I can't stop that threat. So I just want us to be cognizant of those absolutes, and we can get through it and work through it with sound policies and procedures and practices. I just want to caution us on saying you can't do something all the time. Give us a chance to articulate that and make sure we're training it the right way with our people. Thank you.
Wow.
I think you saying training, that's the important step too, Chief Williams.
Chief Williams, so you talked about your personal experience as Black police chief. You kind of mentioned a little bit about police reform. What do you think? Because like you said, realistically, there are some things, given the situation of the threat, that police officers have to do. Because I know you're getting all kinds of letters of different reforms. We've heard the defund the police officers, and Naacp is not supporting it, to reallocate.
Right.
And so what do you see would be a practical reform as far as police officers? Because I heard Chief Williams last week, Chief Whitney, you're kind of like Chief Whitney, and you almost both sound kind of on the same level of what you see as far as police reform.
So let's start with defunding the police department.
Right.
I just need somebody to articulate to me what that looks like, because at the end of the day, regardless of how you feel about us or your personal experiences, there are bad people out there who will shoot and kill you, and someone has to be that entity to respond. And quite frankly, most folks don't sign up to do what we do, and it takes an interesting personality to do that. At the same time, though, I don't want to respond to mental health calls. I don't want to respond to homeless calls. I don't want to be the social worker responding to deal with a child not wanting to listening to their parent. So I've always said here too, that I don't always have to send a blue suit. So if someone is having a mental health crisis, don't call me. We should have a system in place where there is a number and there is a response, but it's a proper response. And so here in Phoenix for the last 6 months, recognizing that we too have had a couple of shootings, fatal shootings, where we've killed someone with a mental health issue and we had no business being there in the first place. So we are offboarding about 400 calls for service every month to mental health professionals to just get the blue suits out of the business of responding to those calls, because quite frankly, we're not trained. It's not our role, and we can't help you in the way that you want to be helped. So if defunding the police means taking funding from other sources and giving it to the entities that can help people in ways that need to be helped, I'm okay with that. But there is still violent crime out there. There are still property crimes out there. There are still crimes out there that are happening. And I think if we can come together and talk about what that looks like, I'll be honest with you, I don't have enough officers. So I'm quite certain most people would tell you that they don't have enough employees to take care of the calls for service that we have. If you can take away some calls off the backs of my employees and have us respond to the police crime calls, sign us up. We would be first in line. Thank you very much. Life is good. We can get back into business. But we as a community need to identify what that defunding means. And to me, and it's not my definition, but we also need community members to identify what they want to see their police departments do. So gone are the days when I can say how you need to be policed. Gone, it's done, it's over. But you as a community member should have a good enough working relationship with your police department where you're saying, Jerry, your folks coming here putting people on curbs is not working for me anymore. I don't care what the issue is. So we need that give and take relationship between whoever your law enforcement professional is and the community to talk about what policing should look like. And we, policing, have the responsibility to change, adjust, and improve, period. It's just the way it is. It's the way it's been over time. And this is one of those moments in times where we're going to have to pivot on a dime.
I agree with you, Jerry. And defunding is not my term, but I do know that defunding means, from what I understand, is someone other than the police dealing with the homeless, the mentally ill, the social worker type things. Their kids won't get out of the room, and you send a police officer there to get the kid up, and all, because that has been a part of what people call the police to do. And I don't think that those kinds of calls should be ones that police take. Like you said, there's a lot of bad people out there that would shoot you. I want you to take care of those people. And I think people are afraid when they hear defund the police because they don't know what it means. And I think a lot of the police chiefs that I've heard speak have said, yes, if those are the things that you're talking about, take them. We shouldn't be dealing with those anyway. We're not trained to deal with the mentally ill necessarily. We need to call the professionals who deal with them, or the kid who won't get up, or things of that, or the homeless who are out there in the street, and having kids sit on the curb because they're, out late or playing around or doing something crazy. So I think a conversation does need to happen with the community and police chiefs sitting down together, deciding what that looks like for their community. And so it scares me when we say defunding, because I want to know what you're talking about as well. If you're just talking about taking money away, that isn't what I want. I want you to, if you're going to take it, what are those things that you're going to move with that money?
The allocation, right. That sounds great. Thank you. Mikaya, as a young participant, how do you see changes you would see in law enforcement?
So I agree a lot with Dr. Pinkard and Chief Williams about it's not necessarily defunding the police and there's no more police. It's about reallocating how much of the funds do go towards the police and putting them towards those specific community organizations that can help with, relieving homelessness, helping with substance abuse, mental health issues, all those things. Because like you guys said, the police aren't trained to deal with those things. And there are people who are in those professional fields who are trained to deal with those things. So I think it's about getting systems in place in communities where we can have those professionals go out and take those calls, because it shouldn't be the police responsibilities. And I think we also have to take a good look at, why certain petty crimes are happening, because of the certain systemic issues that are going on and have been going on for over 400 years, you kind of have to take a step back and, somebody's not stealing something just because they're lazy. There might be a bigger issue behind it. So we have to take a look back at that and see what's going on there. I think, one thing that we could definitely do better with is, funding education more, giving more opportunity in that field. Yeah.
Mikaya, what is it that you're studying at UCLA?
I'm still figuring that out.
Okay. We have a lot of different directions you could go with
Jerry,
what you have been able to achieve. So we're seeing a steady and increasing activism and involvement. This has been going on for weeks, and we've seen marches and protests happening throughout the country. but I remember 28 years ago, was a couple of weeks before my daughter was born, that we had the Rodney King protest going on. And it seems, you know, when I saw that video, I just teared up, like, have we not moved forward at all? It's really devastating to have witnessed that whole chain of events, and then to look at, we are still in this situation. So Dr. Pinkert, at the beginning of the conversation, you talked about how this has been going on for a long time, and you think this time is different, but how do you think it is different? How are we finally going to deal with these systematic issues that are facing the Black community?
For one thing, I see the police departments in various locales agreeing with some of the things that may need to be changed in terms of the social work part of it, the mental health, and some of them are walking with the protesters saying, I agree with you, that was not the way we do business, and that was a homicide. So we have, for the first time that I can remember, police chiefs marching with the marchers, agreeing with some of the things that they have said, and saying, we welcome the movement or reallocation of those funds for certain things that we should not be doing anyway. So I think also that the conversations that we're now having, like right now, are ones that need to continue, that will help us to change. Because you cannot change a person's mind until they've been educated. A lot of people, and I'll say specifically white people, have not been educated as to what Black people are like. But we know what white people are like because we've had to know that from day one to exist. So we have been mistakenly making, I think, white people feel comfortable in certain situations so we don't make them feel uncomfortable, so we feel uncomfortable. We make them feel comfortable at the risk of us being uncomfortable. I think now's the time for everybody to be uncomfortable. We need to have those discussions where everybody may feel uncomfortable, but we'll get something done. Because as long as you're taking the brunt for somebody else being comfortable, then you're not getting your needs met. And that's what has to happen. And the fact that some people have been quiet and have not said anything, and we've let them get away with not saying anything, they're complicit in what's happening. I have some friends that I have not heard from yet, white friends that I would have thought would have called me by now because I'm a person they love, they care about. You're my friend, I love you. I don't know what I'd do without you, but I haven't heard a peep from them since this has happened, which tells me something about that relationship. But they won't know what they need to do until I tell them, or like my husband used to say, if you don't know, then you can't change. You don't know what you don't know until somebody tells you. So I'm going to have to take it upon myself to call these individuals and say, I haven't heard from you, why? Why are you uncomfortable about calling me when I would have heard from you when your insurance, in terms of us having insurance as a group with an agency we were both involved with, when you had concerns about that, you would call me to make sure I was okay. Why didn't you call me about this? So those are the kind of conversations we're going to have. And I think churches need to stop being isolated. We're going to have to cross-pollinate. You are not going to be able to do anything because this is where the bulk of a lot of these people are. You're not going to find very many Black people in Ventura County together, but you will find them together every Sunday in a church when we're back to normal. And we need to visit each other and have conversations in the church, not just a little visit to come and have a sermon and eat cake and go home, but real communication and relationships. And I think joining the AACP would be a good thing for some people to do. So there are a number of things that we can do to start making the changes that are necessary to happen on a long-term basis. But you're not going to do it by being stubborn and not listening, and you don't want to talk, and you don't want to feel bad. All of us are going to have to feel uncomfortable, but we need to sit down and have the conversation, even if it's one-on-one at the beginning, then make it a group, and then a larger group. I'm not saying just jump into it, but there needs to be some conversations among communities about what is happening to some other parts of their community. I'm sure they wouldn't like what they see happening to the Black youngsters and men happening to their kids and men and their families.
And those are the type of ideas I think many of us want to talk about and implement, getting together at churches and just having those type of discussions. And in some ways, as a white person, I'm sitting back right now because it is uncomfortable, because we want to make sure that we are the proper type of ally. And so in some ways, you almost have to take a lead role to let us know how we can best support. Kaya, what is your take? And I know we've talked a lot about police and racism, because that's what started this movement. But in general, if we're looking on social media right now, we see a lot of incredibly inappropriate behavior, all those Costco videos, these, this crazy racism coming out in other aspects. And so how do we deal with that? What do we do differently this time this time? And then I also, you had mentioned education. What about, a more diverse education for younger people? Would that help us understand each other better?
So as far as, how do we continue this? I think it's so important to continue the conversation, because a lot of times when these things happen, they're treated as, just a hashtag or just a trend. And it's so important to realize that, this isn't a trend. This happens. We hear about this almost every day, if not multiple times a day. So it's so important to make sure that we continue having these conversations 6 months from this, 2 years from this, 10 years from this. Because if not, then it's just gonna, who's gonna be the next hashtag? So we definitely need to make sure to continue having these conversations and creating these spaces where Black people can talk, because no one's going to know the Black experience like a Black person. So it's definitely really important to make sure, thank you, Assemblymember Irwin, for putting these things like this together, where you give us a platform to talk and to give us a platform for people to listen. And then as far as, what did you ask about social media? Sorry.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's not, we focused on policing and racism, but the reality is we're seeing a lot of episodes of normal, well, if you want to call them normal folks on social media, where you're seeing racism come out, and not just, I mean, it just happens too that you're seeing it against Asians right now because of, other issues. But how do we change the whole culture, and is it better education too?
I would say definitely better education, because the past month or so on social media, I feel like I have learned more about Black history than I ever did in, going to school and in my history classes. There's so much of our history that is, whitewashed, and so much history that we don't hear that would benefit us so well into understanding each other and understanding why certain things happen, why they do, that we just don't go over. So I think definitely education for sure. And as far as, racism that you are seeing coming out on social media, I think it's also important to understand that people of color experience that stuff every day. So seeing this stuff on social media is nothing new to us. Ever since being in elementary school, I would be called burnt marshmallow and just little things like that, where a little elementary schooler no one should be experiencing racism. But even as my sister was 3 years old in preschool, she was told by another preschooler that she was ugly because she was Black. So no preschooler should be going through that. And so much of that is learned from home life. And the only other
Exactly.
area that we're going to combat that is in education, because where else are kids going? They learn from their teachers and they learn from their parents. And I think it's difficult in education because people don't want to walk that fine line of being too political, but it's also important for us to realize that this isn't political, it's human rights. So we shouldn't be scared to have these conversations, because Breonna Taylor being murdered or Black people being enormously disproportionately thrown into the prison industrial complex shouldn't be political. That should be just basic human rights. And as a human, we should all care about that and want to have those conversations so that we can finally put an end to it.
Amen.
Jerry, I have to go back because we have questions being asked right now. If you could explain what a citizen review board is. You had talked about that as part of the reform movement.
So it actually depends on what area and what jurisdiction you're talking about. So I think the way Dr. Pinkard referenced it is a second set of eyes to review either criminal matters, critical incidents, officer-involved shootings. Depending on where you are, they could have full access to officers or employee records, discipline history, where people are assigned, you name it. Here in Phoenix, it's literally one more set of eyes to review past critical incidents or officer-involved shootings or in custody deaths, and then look at current trends to make recommendations to the police chief on what the department should and shouldn't do differently. There's also a piece, ours is called the Office of Accountability and Transparency, and a Citizens Review Board that could make recommendations on discipline for our officers here based on their understanding of a case or an issue. So what it's doing is, and I think the best way, Assemblywoman, to describe it is currently, if I have an officer-involved shooting in my area, my agency investigates the criminal side, my agency investigates the administrative side. There are no extra set of eyes. It's Phoenix PD investigating Phoenix PD. I will say this, I have full confidence in my agency and my organization, and quite frankly, we've made arrests of officers, we've terminated officers, but there is a subsect of the community out there that frankly doesn't buy it, doesn't believe it, won't ever believe it, and I don't care what you say, because you're a police officer and you're gonna look out for each other. So we have the responsibility as a community to provide that outlet. I think Dr. Pinkard said it, to provide that outlet where if you don't trust Phoenix PD, you do have someone who's this body that you can go to and provide information to, and they can run an investigation. So it's having the police not investigate itself, having a group of community members or professionals to do that.
Okay, and then thank you for that. I just wanted, both you and Irene, Mikaya, all talked about things feel differently this time. But going a little deeper into it, how do we change the culture in certain departments? I mean, we have, departments that are really working hard. It's, Ventura County does an excellent job, but some of these smaller departments in other states, how do you go about changing the culture, and do you have to change the way you recruit potentially?
So I'm guessing that's for me.
Yes, that was still for you.
So cultural change is rough. Cultural change requires incessant, constant communication, education, training. But I will say this, and I think Assemblywoman, you referenced it, or I don't know if Regina did. We have progressive police chiefs, and I'll just talk about the major cities initially. We have progressive police chiefs who are literally saying all the same things that we're all saying on this call or on this conference, that we do need to change. We do need to change policy. We do need to do away with certain things. But at the same time, we need to, as leaders, that is our responsibility, to create a culture where it's okay that if Jerry Williams' partner on shift 3 does some stupid stuff, that Jerry Williams comes and she lets someone know, and she is welcomed because you provided that information. So those are the things that we're all having to work on from a cultural perspective. I think to Assemblywoman's point about the whole Rodney King thing, I was working Phoenix PD and walking beats. We were working in public housing at the time when the Rodney King thing happened. And who would have thought we would have had body worn cameras on cops, in 2020, 2017, 2018. So to some degrees, I don't agree that we haven't changed. We have 7 Black female police chiefs that I can reach out to at a moment's notice to say, Carmen Best, Renee Hall, Danielle Outlaw, Carmen Deck Brown, Cassandra Deck Brown. I got people I can reach out to who look like me, feel like me, are me, heading police departments in this country. You can't tell me that that's like it was in the past. So we need to own this moment in time as the opportunity for us to really create real solutions, that when Mikaya decides she wants to run for assembly person, be a mayor, I don't know if you want to be a police chief, but I'll throw that out there too. That's there for her, and that opportunity is there for her. And I think to Mikaya's point about education, there are some socioeconomic issues that we as a society have failed to address, which is creating the dynamics that are putting people into a system where they think, or based on pure survival, that they have to steal, that they have to commit crimes. We've got to do better about that. That's not a policing issue, that's a flat out community issue. And we owe that to our most vulnerable community members.
Yeah, that's economic development that we have to have across the board. I think that one thing that could change the culture of police is having more diverse police forces. I don't know what other police forces look like, but I know that most of them aren't very diverse from what I can see, even when you're watching the marches. So if you have a group of generic, homogeneous kind of officers, they're not going to know anything about the community that they're going to serve. You need to have police officers that look like your community. You need Hispanic police officers, you need Black police officers, you need Asian police officers in more numbers, because even having those individuals in the police force can change some of the dynamics of what happens when the police go on calls. We don't have very many African Americans in the police force here in Oxnard, but I do know that the chief is working on that. And I think that was something that Chief Williams worked on when she was here, is looking for a more diverse police department. When some of the youngsters see police officers who look like them, who come out to see about issues and problems in the community, they feel more relaxed about talking to the police. But if you only see your oppressor is the only one who comes to see about what's going on, and you've only known them to crack heads and sit you on a sidewalk and arrest you and stop you, there's a different dynamic there. So I think by making sure that you have a more culturally diverse police department would also help with what's going on.
So I wanted to add a little bit to this. I think we all kind of touched on some of it. While we talk about police reform, police brutality, this is a bigger systemic issue that goes way back socially, economically, across the board, that kind of went into what we're seeing now. So when we talk about Black Lives Matter, I think that we're talking more about the whole gamut of where, as a race, we've been oppressed. So I didn't want people to leave and think this was only about police officers. It's about what is going on in the world in general. But the bigger portion of it was what started this movement is what we've seen on television. So my question is to anybody on the panel is, we all come up with ideals of reform, legislation, changing laws, but I think the bigger issue is so deep rooted, and we talk about culturally, it is so deep rooted. Further than that, it's systematically in our system, and that's what we really need to change. So my question is, how do we go about changing it? We're saying get out there and vote. We're saying get out there, change these laws, but how do we change it within the homes? Because that's where, in my opinion, it starts in the home. The poison starts in the home.
Well, I think Mikaya mentioned that.
Right.
Talking about when she was in the 3rd grade or kindergarten or something, that they called her burnt marshmallow. And racism is not something that you're born with.
Right.
That's something you learn. So these young kids are being taught racism and how to not like certain people from home. So that's where you have to start with some of that in the schools and at home. I think our education system does not do well for students when all you see are white teachers in the school system. But they're supposed to teach you, your child rather, just like they would teach their grandchild or their child. And I remember when my son was a youngster, when they started to have busing in LA, and I told him, I am not going to allow you to be bused to another community so you can feel that the people there are better than the people you live with. So they're going to have to do better at the school where you're going. And so we need to make sure that the people at the schools are also trained, just like we're talking about officers. You have as many bad teachers dealing with our kids as you do bad officers dealing with the community. But people won't say that. So we need to look at another way of making sure that those instructors are willing and able to teach every human being that comes to them in the same way. Absolutely. That they would teach them just like they would their granddaughter, their grandson, or anyone else. So I think it starts in the home. We need to make sure it goes to the schools, because some of that has to be stopped. Just like she was called burnt marshmallow, some of the teachers should have sat down and talked to those youngsters about why they were saying that. You have to start home, school, and continue.
Absolutely.
And I think in addition to just talking about, you know, training teachers more and having more diverse teachers, it also has a lot to do with funding as well, because there shouldn't be any reason why, you know, a white kid from the suburbs goes to a better school than, you know, a brown kid in the hood. We should all have equal opportunity for the same education. No kid should be subject to having worse education just because they aren't as rich as somebody else. We should definitely all have equal opportunity to that.
Absolutely.
So if again, we've been talking about bringing in allies, and what are some organizations that people can get involved with? What are some movements that people can get involved with? What should people support financially or physically? And why don't we start with Mikaya on that, and anybody else can jump in.
Yeah, so I guess I'll just kind of stick to local ones that I know of. One organization I'm a part of, it's called Justice in the Classroom. And so we're a student-led organization based in Ventura County, and we focus on making curriculum development for schools all over Ventura County. We're pretty new and still working out, but definitely follow us on social media. So I'm excited for that. And then just as far as a few organizations.
I'm really sorry to interrupt. Could you go a little further into that? Have you had some successes yet in changing curriculum? I know there's a movement to look at curriculum in Oak Park, but how can we help you with that before you go on to the next thing?
Yeah, so we're very new. I think I just joined about a couple weeks ago, but it all started maybe 2 months ago, I believe. And right now we're just kind of working on our community organizations and kind of getting connections with the school boards and everything like that. So I think following us on social media would definitely be a huge help. We post these things called History Outside of the Classroom. And so we have a team that works on development of different, since there's so much of history that was whitewashed, we have a team that kind of goes over different subjects and will educate you on these little PowerPoint slides that we put together on our Instagram. So definitely just supporting us on our social media, and from then on I will have different ways where you can support us there. But like I said, we're pretty new, so yeah. And then as far as other organizations that kind of helped me out when I was doing the protests, when I was leading the protests, we have LULAC, Bueno Vecino, the NAACP, thank you guys. And then also the Social Justice Fund for Ventura County. And those are all just local organizations, grassroots local organizations that helped me out and really just came through and showed their support for me. And not all of them were like African-American organizations. There were some that were Latino. So I think it just all shows how we're all coming together in solidarity to support one another. as people of color. And then one organization I just learned about, it's called Initiate Justice. And so they help people who have been affected by mass incarceration. And during our Juneteenth march, we actually put together, what am I thinking of? We put together like donations for them, and that was one of the organizations we supported. And so they have like a donate link on their website, and definitely check them out. And then the last one, I know I'm listing like a bunch, but the last one, it's called For the Gorls. That's spelled GWORLS, and they help with Black trans folks. So yeah.
That's great.
Thanks for that. Irene, you have done a phenomenal job with the Pinkert Institute and bringing your group of young people to historically Black colleges. Could you talk a little bit about that effort and how people can support you with what you're doing there?
Okay. I guess about 30 plus years ago, my husband and I started the Black College Tours because it's very evident, it was, that our kids were not aware that there were institutions of higher learning in other states other than USC or UCLA that they could go to, and where they would have instructors who looked like them, and the colleges were created for them. And so we just wanted to make sure that students got the opportunity to see students in numbers in college that looked like them, who were successful and doing well, and instructors who looked like them and who were making sure that they would succeed, because it wasn't a matter of if you will succeed, it's you are going to succeed or you're not going to be here, because it was more of a family situation. We don't let anybody who comes here fail. So you are going to succeed if you come here. And our youngsters were so pumped and enthusiastic about going to the various colleges and learning, because they didn't know they existed. And they looked at the kids who were in college and said, I didn't know that there were African-American students in college in these numbers. I've never seen this many Black people, because in this county, you don't see very many African-Americans in numbers in higher learning institutions, or even in elementary school or high school. So this was very unique to them. So it inspired them. So that is something that I am very proud of. Youngsters are still, they go more than one time. They can go from the 9th grade to the 12th grade, because they don't get enough of it. It's like a shot in the arm for them to see other students who look like them being successful and talking to them and seeing what it's like to go to those colleges. And the other thing we do is that our youngsters have a hard time sometimes getting hired because they don't speak Spanish, because a lot of the hiring asks that you be bilingual. So in doing the internship programs during the summer where the kids work for 6 weeks, we just want them to have the experience of work. So the Pinkert Youth Institute pays for them to go to the various agencies and organizations in the county so that they can get the experience. And the parents are just so excited about it. And it's just not African-American students. We have Hispanic students as well, and Asian students, and it's good for them to intermingle, to get close to each other in a situation or a setting that is not just a school-oriented setting. And then the African American Achievement Academy at CSUCI is for a week where the youngsters stay on campus so they can get an idea of what it would be like, get the experience of being on a campus, living on campus, so that it will inspire them to want to go to college and then get a fit. I already know what it feels like, so I want to go. And we also, that's open to anybody, and that has been a real good experience for them. And the students learn Black history as one of the subjects when they are at the academy, because you'd be surprised, just like Mikaya said, she's learned more about Black history and her own history since the George Floyd. And these youngsters need to know more about their culture and the things that they've contributed so they feel worthy as residents and citizens in this United States.
Thank you. And Jerry, do you have any organizations that you suggest that people could get involved with to change the paradigm that we currently have?
I would agree with everything Mikaya and Dr. Pinkard mentioned and said, but I would also encourage folks to really begin the process of having the very hard conversations about what you want your police departments to look like. And you can do that in a number of different ways, but hopefully you have those kind of relationships with your police department, that if you want to begin the process of talking and chatting, and this change is going to be rough and hard and it's going to be uncomfortable and everyone just has to settle in to be uncomfortable. But the only way things change is when it hurts and it's hard. And we just have to kind of just get our minds wrapped around the fact that, you know, Jackie Irwin is a white assemblywoman, and, you know, heck, how do I begin the process of having a conversation? Most of us of color, and I don't know if I speak for Mikaya, but I prefer you ask me questions than to presume that you know what my experience is. You will never know, never have an idea, but I welcome those opportunities for folks that look like you to ask me, you know, what do you think about this? What does it feel like? How is it? I don't understand what it's like. We prefer you have those kind of conversations. I'm guessing Mikaya would prefer that too, than to remain in ignorance, because therein lies our problem.
Well, I want to thank all of you. I mean, truly an incredible group of people, and what great insight you gave to me, and I'm sure to everybody that listened to us on Facebook today. I want to thank Regina for co-hosting this event tonight, and I want to give each of you a couple of minutes to wrap up and with some final thoughts. And why don't we start with Regina?
Okay, so I want to say to everyone, this is the moment now. It's time to be heard. More importantly now than ever. Like I said, 30 years ago, John I. Hatcher stood before Simi Valley with the Rodney King case. And the day I gave my speech, I was standing there thinking, wow, 30 years ago, he was standing here fighting for racism, and 30 years later, I'm standing here. I'm hoping that there'll never be another 30 years that we would have to keep having this conversation. Dr. Pinker touched a little bit about her academy, but she was, I mean, a little humble about it. My children went through it, and my daughter and son came out of it, and they're graduates. And so it's a very dynamic program. We had the Naacp Saturday School, the CLU. I'm telling people, get involved to these organizations, not necessarily the NAACP, get involved with any organization, because that's the only way we're gonna make change. And I wanna say thank you to my sister girl, Jerry Williams. Love seeing you, I miss you, miss you, miss you. This, for me, my experience in the relationship she had with my father, which carried on to with Jerry, and then also with Chief Whitney and the other law enforcement in Ventura County, has been very supportive. And I'm able to have those hard, uncomfortable conversations with them. And I greatly appreciate that they're willing to listen to what the NAACP has to say. Dr. Pinker, you did a wonderful job of getting out what we're working on. So thank you, everyone. It was great. I hope that we will continue this conversation. And thank you, Assemblywoman. I know Assemblymember, Assemblywoman Irwin, because you made maybe what you see as a small step, but in terms it's going to be a bigger step, that these conversations keep happening.
Thank you, Regina. Jerry?
So I just want to say that I wished I had a bunch of Mikayas in my city right now. I love the passion. I love the focus. I love the bravery. I love just the fact that instead of just complaining, you really want to figure out how to make systemic changes. And so she's destined for great things. She probably doesn't know it yet, but very nice to meet you, Mikaya. To the other ladies on the panel, Dr. Pinkard, and to Regina, thank you so much for your love, your support, text messages, all the above through the unprecedented times. I'm supposed to use that word, unprecedented times. And then to Assemblywoman Irwin for, really taking the bold step to have this conversation, because for someone who looks like her, she doesn't have the responsibility to have the conversation. But it is one step of hopefully many that she can take. I'll be honest, Assemblywoman, I said yes, probably after a glass of wine or two, and it's 7:30 at night and I'm still here and we're still talking, but at the end of the day, there's some onus on every person on this panel to serve and make changes, and thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, Jerry. Mikaya?
So first, I would just like to say thank you guys all so much for giving me the opportunity to come over here and speak. I know middle school me is probably like, wow, that's so cool, because I never would have imagined that I'd be doing anything like this. But yeah, so thank you. And I also think it's just important, to say to any of the allies out there watching that one piece of advice I can give when you are having these difficult conversations, because it's so important that we continue to have these conversations, is just to listen. Because it's not about, necessarily using your voice to uplift ours. I think it's more about using your platform to let us use our voice. Because like I said earlier, no one knows the Black experience more than a Black person. And so I think just taking the time to listen, like Assemblymember Jackie Irwin did today, which you did amazing, because you just listened to us and let us talk and truly understand and really, soak in what we were saying. And that's so important because we've barely even hit the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more left to talk about and so much more left to learn. And so we have to continue to do that and listen and learn from each other, because, even as a Black person, I learned obviously a lot today. I'm only 18. So I think we all just need to continue having these conversations and coming from a place of understanding.
Thank you, Mikaya. And we'll wrap it up with Irene.
Thank you. I want to piggyback what everyone else has said. I really appreciate you having this town hall, Jackie, but it didn't surprise me when I got a call that you were going to do this, because you have always been thoughtful like that in terms of trying to learn. And that's what we are looking for in all of our politicians and people who are leaders. A number of them haven't, they don't step in your backyard or in your front yard until it's election time. And that bothers me when I see them all coming to you, and you can't beat them off with a stick because it's election time and they're all over the place. And after the election, they're gone and you never see them until the next time. But you're not like that. And I just want to thank you for listening and being the kind of representative that we need in all of our various levels of government. I want to give a shout out to Mikaya. She's a wonderful young lady. I've never met you before, maybe just that one time, but you are definitely up and coming and one of the people we need to watch, because you are a leader, and we need more like you. And in fact, I've been thinking I need to call her for one of my programs to help me out so that we can work with the young people in the community. But this has been an experience that has been uncomfortable, I know, for Jackie at times, because I know we've just said what we needed to say, but it also, remember, it was a little uncomfortable for us to say it at times, but we knew it needed to be said. And I would like to say to those out there listening, call your friends, have those uncomfortable conversations. If you're with a group, find out what they're willing to do to make things different. They can even ask some of their friends who look like us, what can we do? Because we're willing to listen. And like Mikaya said, listening is the best part of what we can do to hear what your feelings are, because we know what ours are. And if you give us a chance, we can let you know. We're sometimes the only person that looks like us in the room. We do that all the time. When we have a mentor, we usually don't find a mentor who looks like us. We have to find somebody else. Those are little things, but they're significant things for our young people. So if there are people out there listening wanting to know what to do, give us a call. The organizations that Mikaya named are very much the ones that I would have suggested. If you want to donate to different causes, donate to Pinkard Youth Institute. It's a nonprofit. Donate to the Onyx Club, which is a nonprofit. These are organizations that work with young people. Donate to the Naacp, who also has a Saturday school to work with young people. But there are all kinds of things that you can do, and any one of us would be willing to give you some suggestions of where your talents might be used. So thank you very much for this opportunity.
And I want to say thank you to all of you. We will continue this conversation. And I want to say to everybody listening, let's be kind to each other.
Yes.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.